Good afternoon, Miamians. I'm Emily LeFevers from the Miami University Alumni Association. As part of the Alumni Association's webinar series, today we present self-care for burnout prevention. And joining us to tell us a little bit more about this topic is Laura Wansick. So with 16 years of counseling experience, including 10 at Miami, Laura brings expertise in anxiety disorders, OCD, relationship issues, and creative therapeutic approaches, such as art for self-expression. She also coordinates mental health gatekeeper training for Miami's faculty and staff. So welcome to you, Laura. It's so good to have you here with us today. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I always love talking about these topics, so I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, we're excited to have you. So just before I turn it over to you, a quick reminder for our live viewers that you can submit questions and comments throughout the webinar by clicking Ask a Question button under your video. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, Laura.
Cool, thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm so excited to be here to talk about this topic today. Before I get into the slides, I'm just going to share a little bit about my own journey with self-care and burnout and why I'm passionate about this. So, like Emily said, I've been doing clinical work as a counselor for 16 years, and I've been at Miami for 10. And so my first 6 years were in community mental health, which is a very challenging setting to work in as a counselor. And there were a variety of factors that contributed to my own burnout, but I definitely at the end of that 6 years was going to leave the field. So I was looking at other career paths. I was researching programs at Miami. I was looking at maybe just working at Starbucks in the interim to get health insurance. It was a bad time for me. And thankfully, part of what brought me out of that was the work setting at Miami and the factors here that make this work more manageable for me. But there were other pieces to that journey as well. And so I'm hoping that some of the things that I learned, I can share in this presentation today. And of course, also a lot of the things that I'm going to share today are things that I've learned, not just personally, but also professionally, as I've worked with people who experience burnout in a variety of ways from a variety of types of things. So, all right. Emily, can you make my slides the main thing? I don't know how to do that. Thank you. All right. So, self-care, I think that is a word kind of like mental health that, gets a lot of airtime right now. I think it's a popular thing. I don't know if it's just in my social media feed or in the world that I live in, but I feel like I hear a lot about self-care, about mental health, take care of yourself. And sometimes I think that it can feel a little empty because there's not always a lot to back it up. Well, with what time and with what energy and who's going to support that? And so I just want to sort of acknowledge that and also that self-care is a requirement. It's not just in an ideal world. In an ideal world, I will do that, or at a later point, I will do that. I'm assuming that most of us have heard that old adage of, you're on an airplane and you got to put your airplane oxygen mask on before you put it on others. But it really is true, because the more healthy and centered and grounded you are, the more that you're going to be able to help other people. So if your desire is to be a helper in the world, to do good work, to fulfill your obligations, then you have to understand that taking care of yourself is important, because you can't do that if you're not taking care of yourself. And if you don't, then it can lead to chronic stress, burnout. And then, if we're thinking from a professional standpoint, it can affect your competence as a professional, as a worker. And the other thing about burnout is that it exists on a spectrum. So it's not like you're either burned out or you're not. You're somewhere maybe on the spectrum of burnout. And so how am I defining burnout? Again, it might be one of those buzzwords, but let's just sort of clarify what it is. So I like this definition here on the bottom right, that it's a depletion or exhaustion of a person's mental and physical resources that are attributed to their prolonged and unsuccessful striving towards unrealistic expectations, internally or externally derived. there's a lot of pieces of that quote that I think are important. So first, it sort of talks about how it's an emptying. So it's a loss of resource, mental and physical, and other, resources, I would say, as well, spiritual, emotional, all of that are attributed to a prolonged, so not short term. We can handle certain amounts of stress in the short term, but if you're kind of looking at this extension of stress, and unsuccessful striving, so it's not, whatever you're doing is not working, towards unrealistic expectations, so things that are not reasonable to expect a person to be able to do, unrealistic expectations that are either internally, meaning that they're coming from you, or externally, meaning that they're coming from a system that you exist in. So there's lots of layers to burnout to think about. Symptoms, ways that it might show up, could be exhaustion. So kind of showing that emptiness or that emptying, that depletion kind of showing up through exhaustion, that you're kind of at empty all the time and don't have anything to give. And again, that could be physical, mental, emotional. Cynicism, so kind of a negative outlook, and a reduced sense of accomplishment or satisfaction in your life. So it's going from thriving to surviving. And as a result, you might start missing work a lot, think about quitting work, think about quitting a relationship, start having mental or physical health problems or symptoms. And all of this ultimately affects our ability to do our job and to have successful relationships. So what are the risk factors for burnout? And again, I think about my own burnout journey and how, for me, switching the setting was a really big piece. And that's not true for everyone. So not everyone can solve burnout by just getting a new job or getting a new relationship, because you have to really understand what is the factor that's contributed to this, or the factors that are contributing to this for you in particular. But some of the risk factors to think about would be your work factor. So the setting that you work in, the type of person that you're interacting with, which could be, depending on your setting, a client, a patient, a customer, it could be a colleague, a partner, whoever the people are that you're engaging with, and what their presentation is, what their emotions are, can be a risk factor for you to be stressed and burned out. So if you're always interfacing with customers that are upset or belligerent or dissatisfied, that could be a risk factor for you to burn out, versus working somewhere where people are generally in a good mood. So working at an ice cream shop versus working at customer service for a company that has a lot of problems that people get annoyed by. Another risk factor could be an on-call schedule. So if you're expected to be available around the clock, carry an on-call phone, that could be a risk factor. Urgency and crisis could or could not be a risk factor. So some people find that to be exciting and meaningful in their work, and other people find that to be a stressor. So again, this is individualized. So you have to think, what is having a lot of crisis like for me? What is having a lot of urgency like for me? Any kind of admin requirements, so requirements that come from administration, can be hard. And that goes back to kind of those expectations. So if there are unreasonable expectations that you can't meet, that's going to be a risk factor, because you're not going to ever quite get that feeling of satisfaction or accomplishment. And then low morale amongst staff and people just kind of complaining a lot. There is a contagion to people being negative, and we tend to get affected by the people around us and the way that they are. And so if you're around a lot of people that are dissatisfied, that could be a risk factor for you to become dissatisfied. And then, of course, there are things within yourself that could be risk factors for burnout, even in the most ideal setting. If you're struggling with physical health, mental health, depending on where you are in your career. People at the very beginning of their career face unique challenges versus people that are mid-career versus people that are late career. And then your personality and temperament can be risk factors. That could be either because of the mismatch between you and your setting or you and your work, or it could just be that your personality and temperament struggle with stress management, and you're kind of just naturally at risk for it despite the setting. And then, of course, just your general life stress. So, if you're really have a lot of stress going on in your personal life, and then you have to go to work and deal with a lot of stress, that's also going to be adding to the risk that you could develop burnout, which, again, I just want to say exists on a spectrum. So I also just want to acknowledge that there is no amount of intervention that can fix a toxic environment. So, if you have unrealistic demands, if you have unrealistic expectations placed on you, there is no amount of positive thinking or box breathing that can make you suddenly be able to tolerate something that is toxic. You can't swim through toxic water and not get sick. So why is it hard to engage in self-care? And I just want to pause and kind of define self-care. So self-care would be anything that is, and it's very unique. So something that is self-care for one person might not be self-care for another person, but self-care could mean setting boundaries, but it means anything that you are doing to promote resilience and anything that's restorative for yourself. So it's meeting your basic needs. It's having a sense of purpose and direction with your life, and making sure that you are setting good boundaries within yourself and also with other people. And so why is that hard? Why is it hard to engage in self-care? Why is it hard to rest? Which is also a part of self-care, right? Again, it might look different for different people, but rest is a form of self-care. Why is it hard to eat well, or to make sure that you're taking walks, or drink enough water, or sleep enough? All of the foundational pieces to good self-care. Well, one of the things is cultural. So there can be societal pressure to hustle, work hard, play hard. And so, sometimes when we're swimming in water, we don't recognize how we're being affected by that water. So there's a story that I love to tell that's an anecdote from David Foster Wallace that says, 2 fish were swimming along in the water and they pass another fish. And the fish says to the 2 fish, "Hey, how's the water?" And the 2 fish swim on and they say to each other, "What the hell is water?" And so it's the idea that when we're so deeply embedded in something, we sometimes don't even understand what it is or how it's affecting us. And so if we've always operated from a mentality of work harder, work harder, work harder, always say yes, take on more, minimize self-care, then it can be hard to value it because you've never even considered the fact that you need to value it. And so I think there's this societal expectation, at least in the US for a lot of people. And again, depending on the systems that you exist in, so maybe the corporate world or healthcare, different settings have different expectations and different norms. There might be pressure for you to minimize self-care, to sacrifice for the company. And sometimes that's overt and sometimes it's subtle. So someone, an administrator where you work might say, "We really value self-care," and then send a mixed message of, "Be sure that you always respond to emails after work." And so it could be kind of a mixed message or not, again, kind of like the water you swim in, that you haven't had a chance to kind of pause and say, this is the fact of the matter. So it could be not supported. We also tend to value in our culture self-control, self-reliance, and autonomy. And so kind of this idea of needing other people or needing a break sometimes could be seen as weak or dependent. And so how you perceive those things or how you reframe those things could really help you to value self-care more. And there might be other reasons for you in particular why it's hard to engage in self-care. If you have any thoughts about them, write them down and we can talk about them at the end. Okay, so what do we do with all that? So we're talking about how it's important. We're talking about how self-care is important and burnout is good to prevent, but like, how do we do that, right? So here are some ideas for ways that you could put yourself at risk for doing well instead of risk for burnout. So I like to start with kind of the basic things. If someone comes in to see me and they're struggling, I'm going to start at the bottom of the Maslow hierarchy of needs. What are your base level functioning, stats? Are you getting a good amount of sleep? Sleep is extremely important. Are you drinking water? Are you eating a balanced diet? Are you moving your body? So all of those things, keep your physical body in good health, which then promotes good mental health, because the reality is that they're connected. The physical body, the mental body, we are whole people. We can't silo. So we can't say, I'm not going to work on my physical health, but I want my mental health to be great. They're too connected. And research just continues to support that more and more as time goes on. So what we find is that those basic things become ever more important the more and more we research them. There's no way to avoid them. If you're at a job where you sit a lot, try to move as much as you can, get your blood flowing, get your muscles moving. That's been one of the hardest parts of my job that I've become more aware of as I'm getting older, is how hard it is to sit. It's really, really hard to sit. The mind really benefits from stillness and the body really benefits from movement. And in our culture, we often do the opposite. So our minds tend to be moving, and our bodies tend to be very still. And so it's important to make sure that you're balancing that out by quieting your mind and by moving your body. And again, that could look very different for some people find running helpful, some people find walking, some people find yoga helpful. Whatever it is for you, just kind of getting your blood flowing. So taking care of your physical health and then taking care of your mental health. So doing things that reduce stress. Sometimes when I ask clients about what they do to de-stress, or if they have a hobby, they'll often talk about, well, I run or I do this particular thing. But what we find is that sometimes there's a goal attached to it. Well, I really like to run, and also I'm training for a marathon, or I'm also doing this other thing. And so I just want you to consider the fact that when you're doing a hobby or when you're doing something to reduce stress, there really shouldn't be any stress tied to it. So if you find running relaxing, that's great. But if you spend your runs stressed about how you're running, then that's not really a stress reduction activity. So you want to do things that don't have any stakes, that don't have any expectation with them, to help reduce your stress, to help kind of get into a flow state where your brain can kind of calm down. Again, I would also encourage you to consider doing things that are screen-free. We spend so much time looking at a screen. And again, there's research about that and how that's affecting the brains. I think technology is moving faster than the research is. And so I think there's ways in which we don't quite understand the way that that's impacting our stress levels, but we live in an extremely stimulating world. There's a lot of lights, there's a lot of noise, there's a lot of, things that are kind of vying for our attention. And so trying to quiet your mind and quiet your surroundings and clean off the chalkboard is how I always think of it, is good for your brain. So engaging in mindfulness, which is really a great practice where you're kind of practicing detaching from your thoughts and not thinking about all of your thoughts. That's really kind of the core piece of mindfulness and meditative activities, is having times where you recognize kind of what your inner world is like, pausing and having a little bit of detachment from you and your stress. Spending time in nature is very good for mental health, very grounding. Again, I think it's the sensory, low stimulating environment that's good. like I talked about, engaging in hobbies that you find relaxing. And then if you feel like you're struggling with a mental health, issue that requires therapy, utilizing resources like if you have an EAP or any access to mental health services. Connecting. That's a really great way to prevent burnout. Make time for meaningful connection. Connection in situations where you feel like you belong, with people that you feel like hear you and know you and get you. That's very good for our mental health and for our souls. I often think of our support systems as a house, and different people kind of belong in different rooms, and that's okay. Not everybody's meant to be in every room, but different rooms serve different functions. So I've got this little bubble chart that I made, and I did this kind of for myself, but it's an illustration for you as a way to maybe conceptualize your own support network. So I think about my needs, the needs that I have as a person, and the different hats that I wear and the roles that I have, and how different people in my life meet different needs for different parts of who I am. And so, I have my professional identity, I have my clinical work that I do, and it's very helpful for me to have people that understand that piece of my life. My colleagues that are able to listen and validate and support me if I'm struggling in a particular way. And that could be people that I work with now, or that could be people that I knew in grad school. And so for you, that could be people that work in your field that understand some niche things maybe that you face with your daily work. It's nice when people kind of speak the language of whatever system you live in. And then, I have my role as a mom. And so it's nice to have friends who understand pieces of what it's like to be a mom. And they can offer validation and support and community and maybe tips, maybe humor. So it's nice to have people that get that. And those are not always the same people as the colleagues, but they're meeting a different need. And so it's kind of like diversifying your portfolio. You want to have people in all sorts of different pockets of your life so that you can get a lot of your needs met. And then I have my ride or dies, my longtime friends, people that have known me since I was a little kid, which I know is not common for everyone, but for me, they bring nostalgia. They know me really well, emotional support. They're cheerleaders, and we laugh together, and that meets a really big need of mine. And then I also kind of have this hobby where I love to craft, and I love having friends that I can talk to about that. And so we can share what we're working on or what's happening kind of in the craft world. And there's some spillover there with some longtime friends and maybe some colleagues. But again, it's this different pocket of people. And so if you think about yourself, either through the bubbles or through the house metaphor, you kind of want to think, what are the different rooms in my house? Maybe I want to have a friend that gets work. I want to have a friend that understands what it's like, this particular identity of mine, that they understand what that's like. The more people that you have to connect with about your experiences and hold shared experiences, the more resilient you are. And that's definitely a protective factor against burnout. And then the last thing here is being mindful of venting. So, I think venting is tricky because there's definitely, I think, value in coworkers getting together and sharing frustrations, because that can feel really cathartic. It can feel really validating. It's a way to connect with people. But a vent, if you think about a literal vent, it's letting air out. And so you're venting if at the end it feels like it's released and it's over. But if you walk away from a session or a time where you were spending time venting with people, but you feel like you're just as riled up, that might be more negativistic complaining, getting stuck in something, and less about venting, which is kind of more of a release. And I definitely have noticed throughout my career that people that engage a lot in that, where there's a lot of negativity, a lot of talking, a lot of complaining, getting kind of stuck in stuff in a way that doesn't feel like it's functionally letting go, but rather functionally holding on, I definitely see much more burnout, dissatisfaction, frustration from those people. Okay, boundaries. So I think that boundaries are one of the most important things when it comes to work-life balance, which I think is a direct driver for a lot of people of burnout. So first of all, again, I think this is one of those words that's like a buzzword. Like, I need to set a boundary, a boundary. Well, what is a boundary? I'm going to just plug another presentation that I do on boundaries. It's an hour-long thing where we just talk about boundaries. I could talk about boundaries for decades. I love it because it's so powerful and it's so important. So without going into all of that, I'll just say that one of the types of boundaries that exists is a mental boundary. And so a mental boundary is within you. So boundaries are not just about what you will or will not let other people do. Boundaries are also within yourself. So we have internal boundaries that we're regulating. And what you allow yourself to think about is a boundary. So if you are driving home from work and you've got a 30-minute commute and you spend that whole 30 minutes thinking about work, for some people that might be cathartic. When they get home, they let it go, and that's fine. Other people might find that they're thinking about it the whole way home. Then they get home and they tell their partner about it, and then they tell their friend about it. And all of that is time that you're giving to work. You're donating it to work, right? Because what we give attention to, what we think about, ends up being how we live our life. And so when you don't have a way to kind of set a boundary mentally and say, I'm not going to think about that thing right now. That doesn't deserve my attention. When you're not able to do that, you're sort of living at the whims of your frustration or of the things that are around you. And so learning how to sort of shut that off and set a boundary with your mind is a really great skill for reducing burnout, so that you're only working when you're at work. And I'm talking a lot about work, but this would apply to anything. So if you have a really frustrating person that you don't like being around, when you're with them, you're frustrated. When you're not with them, you let it go, right? So you are careful about what you allow your attention to focus on. Another boundary is about learning to say no. So prioritizing tasks. Limits make us prioritize, and we all have limits. We all are humans. We all have 24 hours in a day. And so we all have to decide what's important to me. How am I going to spend my time? And so knowing how to say no is a really important thing if you're going to be able to live according to the priorities that you have. Boundaries are not just about keeping out the bad. Boundaries are also about letting the good in. So another really important skill is knowing how to say yes. That means letting people help you, delegating, holding people accountable for what they need to be doing. And then lastly, use vacation, sick time, PTO, however your place does it. Take breaks. I noticed before I worked at Miami, I worked at probably 4 different settings. And every time that I left, I had I'd get almost $2,000 paid out of vacation time. And I started to wonder, is there a connection between the fact that I was banking up all this vacation time and then burning out? So, it's nice to have a buffer. It's nice to know that you're not always at zero. But vacation and sick time exist for a reason. And so it's okay to use them. And I would definitely say it's okay to use them for mental health reasons. I don't know the specific expectations wherever you all work, but that would be my own value. So manage your energy. So going back to this idea that we all have limits, we're all humans. You only have so much energy. You only have so much attention. You can't pull from nothing. And so prioritizing is important. So making a list of all the things that you do in a day or week and then reviewing that list can be a helpful way to kind of zoom out and get some perspective. So this is just an exercise you could do where you write down everything that you do in a day, everything you do in a week, whatever would make sense for you. And then mark the items based on whether they're energy gains or energy drains, because we can't just be constantly having energy drains. We have to have things that fill us up. You know, nature teaches us, I think, about ourselves. And something that nature teaches us is that things exist in cycles, that there are beginnings and endings, and creation comes from destruction, and growth comes from pain. And there's all these beautiful ways that nature shows us how to be human. And one of the things that we know is that things that go up must come down, things that are taken must be replenished. These are just laws of nature, and really they're things about us as humans. And so you kind of, it's helpful, I think, to look and say, okay, when I look at my life, how much of what I'm doing is filling me? How much of it is replenishing me? How much of it is getting me ready for the things that are going to drain me? Because life is going to have both. And so you want to nurture the gains as much as you are doing the things that drain you. Okay, so I talked about how burnout exists on a spectrum. And much like, many health things, prevention is worth a pound of cure. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure is the quote, I think. So if you can catch little tiny red flags that you are maybe leaning towards burnout or you're starting to get burned out, the sooner that you can do something about that, the better. So coping skills are proactive, not reactive. When someone comes to me and says, I'm really depressed, I'm really anxious, I want to learn some coping skills, I don't just say to them, okay, when you're having a panic attack or when you're in the depths of depression, here's what you do. We're going to talk about not what do you do when you're at an 8 out of a 10. We're going to talk about what do you do when you're at a 4 out of 10, so that you're not getting to an 8 out of 10. Because it's much harder to deal with it when it's really severe. It's much easier to deal with it when it's in its more early, mild, manageable form. I think the flip side of that is people often don't feel as motivated to do self-care because it's like, I can handle it, I can push it a little bit more. So I would encourage you to practice self-care strategies as sort of a baseline, something that you're just doing regularly to kind of keep your mental health and physical health in good stead as much as you can. I think about it a lot of times like a cup of water. And if a cup of water is almost to the very top, it's more likely to spill. And so you want to keep your water level lower so that you can handle some more water coming in if it needs to. Water being stress. Okay, this is an activity that I read in a book one time, and I just love it. And it's basically about identifying some of your personal risk factors for burnout, and also incorporating some self-care strategies. So this is a stoplight, as you can tell. And the red circle is supposed to represent anything that is just a no-no for you. And this is going to be unique to every person. So, and it'll be unique depending on your personality, on the situation that you're in, the work setting that you're in. But red is basically something that you just know isn't going to work for you. It's just going to be bad for you. And so for me, I put examples for myself in here. Some things that are in my red zone are having more than 7 clients a day. I just can't do that. That's a boundary that I hold. 7 is my maximum. 7 is hard for me, but I can do it. But I will not do 8. My record is 9, and that was horrible. And that was when I burned out. But I don't see more than 7 a day. And I won't see more than 4 in a row. So that's the other boundary that I have for myself, is that I deserve a break if I've seen 4 clients in a row, more than the maybe 5 minutes that I get between clients. And then the yellow circle is things that can kind of go either way. So sometimes they're kind of red-ish, but not always. So for me, talking about work after work would be one. So sometimes it's helpful to come home and kind of go like blah, 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 to my husband, and then I kind of move on. Got to be cautious though, because like I said before, I got to be careful that it's not moving into that kind of rumination, I'm getting stuck on something kind of mentality, versus I shared about this thing and now I feel better. And then another thing in the yellow zone for me personally is my notes that I have to write after sessions. So I really try to get them done the day of, ideally right after the session. Sometimes that's too much. Sometimes that's not good for me. I need to take the 5 minutes that I have to go do something else. And sometimes writing the note is good. So it can kind of go either way. And then green things are basically your self-care, things that are always good for you to do. So one thing that I have found is walking between sessions. I try to just literally do a lap around the hallway between every single client, just so that I'm kind of moving my body. Sometimes I'll just stretch. Sometimes I'll just do jumping jacks, just anything to get my blood flowing. And then every year in the fall semester and the spring semester, I pick 2 or 3 days and I just ask for them off. They're extremely random. I'll just pick like a random Wednesday, a random Tuesday, and it's something to look forward to. And also just what I find is that if I don't take those as vacation days, I'll end up taking them as sick days. So I'd rather be proactive, like I said about coping skills, being proactive, not reactive. And really, it's better for everyone, because when I'm proactive, then I'm not having to call in sick and my clients are then having to get canceled on at the last minute. That way, I just know I'm going to have these 3 days off. If there's anything that comes up that I need to do, I know I can put it on one of those days so that I don't have to be stressed because I need this doctor's appointment or whatever. So I found that works for me. So you might find that you have a completely different list, and that's completely fine. But I would use this as a tool to kind of assess your own risk factors in the red and yellow, and then your self-care in the green. Okay, that's the end of my presentation. I didn't know that was the last slide. So Emily, I'm available for questions. And then, of course, I have a QR code here for any feedback that people want to give about the presentation. And this is my resource list.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So I'll go ahead and pull this down, but I'll put your slides back up at the end if people have.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
Would like to scan that QR code. So our first question that came in is burnout a part of life and something we should fear less and try not to avoid completely, but rather manage it when it occurs?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good question. I think that burnout, well, like I said, it exists on a spectrum. So does extreme burnout, where you want to quit your job and leave relationships, and does that exist for everyone? Probably not. Maybe. I don't know. I think it's so uniquely individual. But I think as humans, of course, we're going to burn out on things. We're going to get sick of things. We're going to get tired. We're not always going to be in a good mood. I think we're going to go through seasons of our career. We're going to go through seasons of relationships where we feel a little over it, a little tired, a little burned out. But I think it's really about the severity and about the chronicity. So how long is this lasting and how disruptive is it?
So kind of along the lines of that same question, someone wants to know, how do you know what you're feeling is burnout and it's not just a bad situation?
You're still loading, Emily. I hope I'm not the one that's still loading. If you're talking and I'm not responding, I just want you to know.
Oh, it shows that I'm still loading. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Somebody said, how do you know what you're feeling? This goes hand in hand with the other question. And it was, how do you know what you're feeling is burnout? They said, lots of times it feels like it's just a bad situation. It's time to move on. Or how do you know if what you're actually feeling is burnout?
Well, I think I would go back to that definition of like a depletion of resources, like how empty you feel, like how much do you have left to give? Feelings, I also have a whole presentation on feelings I love to give, but feelings are functional. Feelings are healthy. And feelings are little messengers. Feelings have data. And so I think a helpful question to ask yourself is, what are my feelings of burnout, frustration, whatever feeling, whatever label you're going to put on it? What are those feelings trying to tell me? Are they telling me that there's a mismatch between me and my setting? Are they telling me that my stress level's too high? Are they telling me that sometimes life is just going to be like this and it's just part of being an accountant in tax season or whatever the thing is? Yeah. I hope that's helpful.
Yes, thank you. So I have a couple questions. Two of them are pretty similar. So somebody wants advice in addressing burnout related for caring for somebody else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And just caring like for an elderly parent.
Yeah. And I think that's when boundaries really gets to be an important thing is, first of all, if there's unrealistic expectations, if it's just not doable, I think we can't self-care our way out of something that's unmanageable. So I think you have to say, does this feel reasonable? That's, to me, question number one. And then I think question number two is, going back to boundaries, is there anything that I need to say no to, or is there anything I could say yes to? So is there anything that I need to let in? Do I need to delegate? Do I need to accept help? Do I need to let go of this other thing? How do I need to shuffle things? But I think part of caretaking, for being in a caretaking role, is extremely draining. If you don't have those, like talking about that energy drain and gain, if you don't have those gains, you can't just pour from an empty cup. And so you have to think about, what am I doing to replenish myself as the helper?
And this question might be a little bit similar, but I'll ask it anyways, and you can let me know if it's too similar. But can burnout exist from caring about somebody else's burnout? And if so, how should one manage this?
So that, to me, is another boundary issue, but a slightly different boundary. So to me, that's about emotional boundaries. So emotional boundaries are about recognizing what is yours to hold and what is someone else's to hold. So we can't manage other people's emotions. We can't make decisions for other people. And so part of having good boundaries is knowing that other people are going to feel unpleasant feelings. They're going to go through hard things. And all we can do is just be there and be supportive, but we can't fix it. There's nothing that we can do to fix it. And so recognizing that limitation is very powerful.
Thank you. And then one final question. Do you have any advice for those in leadership positions who are constantly in meetings and getting pulled in different directions?
Well, yeah. I think, again, it goes back to boundaries. Boundaries are a powerful part of burnout, because when you overextend, when you don't have the resources to meet demands, then that's going to be a natural pathway to burnout. So again, I think it'd be similar to the caretaking thing of knowing the limits of what you can and can't do, delegating, saying yes, saying no. And it's hard as a leader. I think a leader is similar to a caretaker in the sense that there's a responsibility there. And so you want to meet the expectations and be a responsible and caring leader, and make sacrifice and all of that, but also honor your humanity. You're not a machine, you're a human. And when you treat yourself like a machine, then you're reducing your humanity, which is going to increase burnout.
Thank you, Laura. And that was all of our questions that we have. So I'll put your QR code back up just in case people are interested in reaching out. And while I do this, do you have anything final you'd like to say before I close this out?
Just if anybody's interested in any of those other presentations, let me know. I'm always happy to talk about all of those things. And I can send any slides or any tools that anybody wants.
Great. Thank you so much, Laura. And thank you to all of you who joined us today. I hope you all gained something valuable from this. I know I did. So as a reminder, a recording of this webinar will be available on our website later today, which is alumlc.org/MiamiOH. You can also find recordings of almost all of our past webinars as well, and everything we have upcoming. Those are free and open to everybody, so we'd love to have you join us. Thank you again to you, Laura. Thank you to those of you who joined us and asked questions. Love and honor, and have a great rest of your afternoon.
Thank you.